family. Welcome to this week's episode of The Inspired Evolution. This week we have on Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote the book called The Body Keeps the Score. He is a member of many prestigious universities in the States, written over 150 journal articles on trauma and how to heal from trauma. In this episode, we basically dive deep on trauma and how it's stored in the body, and what causes trauma and what causes it to be stored in the body. So the first half of the podcast, we basically spend talking about trauma, how it happens, how we store it, how it actually ends up in the body. And the second half of the podcast is dedicated towards healing and all the different modalities that we have for healing. This podcast really surprised me in terms of what the healing modalities that are most effective for people that are trying to recover from trauma. It is not what I expected. Having said that, once he started explaining all of this, I wasn't surprised. So it's a really yummy episode about trauma and healing. If you want to know more about trauma, or if you're passionate about healing, tune into this conversation. As always, the invitation to subscribe to the Inspired Evolution means a lot to us to stay connected to you. As you know, connection is my highest value. And if you love this video, hit like, leave us a comment below. I love engaging with you on the comments. Some of the conversations that are happening in the comment sections to some of these YouTube videos on the Inspired Evolution have been completely life-changing for me personally, and I know for those tuning in as well. So stay connected, stay inspired, keep evolving. Tune in to a very yummy episode with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Aside from my soul, welcome to the Inspired Evolution, and it is a blessing to be here today. We have with us Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Doctor, how are you?
I'm all right this morning, thank you.
So, for those tuning in for the first time, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he's a Boston-based psychiatrist and a New York Times best-selling author of a wonderful little book, not so little, but a wonderful little book called The Body Keeps the Score. He was previously the president of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, professor of psychiatry at Boston University Medical School, and medical director of the Trauma Center. He has taught at universities around the world. His work's been featured in places such as Time, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and more. It is such a treat to have you here today. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us.
Oh, it's good to be in Australia. But
remotely in this new world that we live in. Doctor, I don't want to dilly-dally too much. So tell me, Bessel, how do you define trauma?
Trauma is an experience that just overwhelms your system. Basically, I like to, in a crude way, say, you go, oh shit. And there's really nothing you can do. You're supposed to fight, or you're supposed to flee, or you're supposed to do something, and there's nothing you can do. And you sort of give up, you shut down, and then it becomes traumatic if that experience keeps coming back. And if you keep feeling that way. So we all have had an experience like that, but hopefully it doesn't become traumatic. And something becomes traumatic is there's something happens in your mind and brain that cannot let go of it, and doesn't allow you to say, okay, that happened last year or 20 years ago, but it feels like it's still happening today.
So can you tell us a little bit about what it is that's why are we holding, what is the process of the mind? Why is it holding on to some of these things and not letting go potentially on some of those experiences?
I think the core system gone awry. Basically, we all create maps of the world that tell us on a very deep level, largely unconscious, what is safe, what's dangerous. When you go into cafeteria, you choose some food. Why you choose that food over something else, God knows, but there is something in your system that says that food is better than that food. And then you have an option of sitting at what table, and you choose to sit at that table and not that table. maybe because sometime a long time ago, somebody who had a yellow dress on you didn't like particularly well, so you go sit with somebody with a blue dress. It's all things that are automatic reactions. Why do you choose that car and not that car? Why choose that book? And these are all, we have a map in the world, what is safe, what is dangerous, and so we have all these little systems in our brain that create a map of where we need to go. And if something bad happens, you get a very strong reaction of don't go there. So you get a very strong warning signal of don't hang out with guys or don't do sex or whatever, because that is dangerous. And these stimuli sometimes generalize, and then it becomes too large, so that anybody who looks a particular way or anything that sounds a particular way becomes a source of danger, and your body reacts with a hormonal output and physiological output that makes you freeze or makes you upset or angry as a warning sign. So it is all in evolution. Really, it was all meant to create systems that help to guide you through life. But if the system becomes too extreme, it actually messes it up. And then anything to remind you of something makes you feel as if you're in mortal danger. But you don't know. See, it's not like you're not aware of it. You just go like uh, uh, anything. You go like, no, I hate people who have turbans on. Or I hate people who have Dutch accents or and wise. And I don't know. I just hate those people. So it's a very primitive response of the human organism. If you have ever adopted a dog from a pound, you know that dog has been abused. Like my daughter just got a dog from a pound, and she puts her tail between her legs whenever she sees uh, my daughter's Australian-born red-haired husband, and the dog just becomes terrified. And clearly, something happened to that dog uh, before he went to the pound. That was terrible. But that's very much how human beings are. Like it's an automatic, very primitive response.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for articulating that. And so from there, what I'm hearing is it's somewhat in our, like it's the map of the world that we navigate. It's in our subconscious, and we're not entirely conscious of how we're navigating based on some of these traumatic experiences that drop in, and they form. I don't want to use the word prejudice, but kind of like a sort of not even a hindrance, but just a skew, if you will, on the way that we navigate the world.
But always based originally on you're trying to protect yourself.
Safety was the original idea.
As like, yeah, you had to shut yourself down. Yes, you had no choice. But then later on, when someone puts your head on your shoulder and you feel like you're getting killed, then that response is really um, become a detriment, and it really gets in the way of you having a life.
Do these experiences generally have to be extreme experiences? Like I know you said it has to be overwhelming, or can it be an everyday experience? Not really an everyday experience.
No, these are really things about very life-threatening experience. Like you really feel like your life has come to an end. But I don't know if you have kids. Do you have kids?
No.
Oh, no, I think
True.
I don't mean to be prejudicial here, but you really know very little about life until you have kids. Kids are these creatures that need to find their way in the world, and kids have very catastrophic reactions. Huh? And so kids all the time feel like, oh my God, I'm going to die. That's how they respond. And then you have parents who pick you up and they rock you and they sing to you and they hold you, and then you feel calm again. And so at that point, it's very important to have people around you to calm you down when you feel overwhelmed. And that to some degree continues throughout your life. And to some degree, as long as you have people in your life who are really there for you, the likelihood that you'll really get traumatized is sharply decreased. It's not that it disappears, but uh, we know, of course, a lot about trauma in war and men, and they do okay as long as their buddies, their best friends, are all there for them. But when you see your best friend getting blown up, so it's also very relational, and because humans need each other to make themselves feel safe. And most of us, if you're lucky, we find people to be with and spiritual beliefs that where we feel at home, where as long as we're there, we feel fundamentally taken care of and safe. And then we can put up with a lot of stuff. Actually, it's interesting. There was some studies came out of Israel uh, that the more of a religious fanatic you were, the less likely you were to get traumatized.
Huh.
you know,
Because you have
uh,
a sense of community.
because you get this deep sense of that is meaning to everybody, and some God or something is on my side. And so, even if terrible things happen to you, you can still have a deep feeling like it's okay. Uh, I don't advocate it. I don't think fanaticism is really the best answer to the human problems, actually. But if you happen to be a fanatic and you happen to listen to it, count yourself lucky. You're less likely to get traumatized.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's really fascinating. This whole idea of having your best friend around or having community people that you can count on,
Yeah.
actually being an instrumental part of your your, I don't want to call it coping mechanism, but ability to handle
And
traumatic
survival
experiences.
system.
Survival.
It's very elementary. That's very much at the core of ourselves. And then, so what becomes most traumatic is if the people who you love and count on, if they do terrible things to you.
Mm.
And then, and of course, many people can relate to that, the greatest, deepest hurt is to be brutalized by the people we love.
Mm. And that's where it seems like, especially if those are your parents or loved ones early on, people seem to store some of these.
Or even your spiritual community.
Mm.
That they happen there also.
Mm. And so, one of the things I found pretty radical when I read the book was trauma getting stored in the body. There's actual physical changes that your brain undergoes after post traumatic, like through the traumatic experience. Like your brain is actually different having gone through
Well,
trauma.
yeah, so my book's called The Body Keeps Score, and you experience in your body, but the famous neuroscientist Joe Ledoux said, Bessel, you don't keep it in your body, it's all in your brain. I said, technically you're correct, Joe, but you experience in your body. Huh?
Mm.
Charles Darwin already wrote about it 150 years ago, that when people are really upset or animals are really upset, you feel it in the form of heartache and gut-wrenching sensations in your body.
Mm, mm,
Uh,
mm.
it's a very somatic experience. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are quite universal experiences that we feel, like, the hurting heart or the real gut sort of, and
Every language in the world has words for heartache and gut wrench. I check whenever I travel to one more exotic place after another, and I ask, "How do you say heartache?" You go, "Oh,
Yeah, because there's then it sort of implies that me to lead the question that, hey, is there certain parts of the body that are associated with different traumatic, like in traumatic experiences?
Yeah, it's very much that it's that sensation of your innards churning away. And in fact, uh, what the research also shows is that if you have been traumatized, the likelihood that you'll get actual bowel problems, that you get actually heart problems, actually sharply increases.
Mm,
So basically, what happens is when something terrible happens to you, you get these signals to your body like "get the hell out of here." So
mhm,
your normal response to something bad is to fight or to flee. But if you cannot fight or flee, this sensation comes to your body, urging you to do something, but you can't because somebody holds you down or you're trapped or whatever. And then the sensations continue, and really wear away at your nervous system and wear away in your body. Because the function of your brain is actually to make sure that you're okay. So the function of these stress hormones is to get you the hell out of there. But if you cannot get out of there, the system may get stuck and keep sort of producing all that stress stuff so that your body actually becomes a chronically traumatized body.
So in terms of getting out of situations, it seems like that's kind of this linchpin moment within the traumatic experience that you have. If you can't get out, you're kind of stuck. How much of a role does helplessness play?
It's about helplessness. Huh? So what helplessness, but the helplessness is one sensation, but because we're such social creatures, the other one is betrayal. And a very core element of trauma is a feeling of God-forsakenness. So when I wrote my previous book with my Australian friend Alexander McFarlane, we kept using the word God-forsaken. And our editor kept changing it to lonely. And we kept saying, no, not lonely, God-forsaken is the word. Yeah. And really like you're bereft. There's nobody there, and you're just like you're on your own. Like, yeah.
That is quite, that is, even as you're feeling that, I can feel the sensations as my body, just the way you're articulating that, actually.
Yeah.
So the nervous system, tell us a little bit about its role in kind of processing trauma, modulating trauma, like what's going on there?
Well, again, it's really hang out with kindergarten teachers because they know all this stuff. They deal with little babies are like little animals with a little bit of a prefrontal cortex, and occasionally they're rational, and occasionally they're and so basically, we have brains to make our way in the world, and it starts off very primitive without much thinking, but the basic function of your brain is to help you to negotiate your life and to make sure that your body is okay. So the first order of business for your brain is to say, time to eat, time to sleep, time to take a rest, time to get to work. But basically, the function of your brain is to have a functioning body. And in the Western world, and I don't know if that's different in the world that you come from, I wouldn't be so sure. We tend to sort of ignore what's below your chin and just think that we're just a bunch of brains with a appendage that eats too much. But in fact, we are our bodies, and that's who we are. And so, in the culture that we live in, and certainly in Australia also, I'm always impressed how similar Australia is to the US. You guys may not be glad to hear that, but you're a very similar culture. People get very in their head and as if see the body as an inconvenience that needs to be taken care of, and that's really not a very good way of living, basically. Huh?
Yeah, so does that orientation of being more head-based itself pose, I don't want to use the word threat, but challenge of becoming more readily traumatized? I'm thinking about the word resilience a little bit here. If I'm spending more and more time in my head and engaging with the thoughts and not recognizing my body, and let's say potentially I've pent up
Yeah.
things that I'm not looking at, am I compromised?
Yeah, it has a life of its own, and you are writing your book, and then suddenly you get constipated, or you suddenly have a panic reaction, or you cannot sleep, or something, and so your body will send signals to you like, "Hey, pay attention to me."
Fascinating. And does trauma? So one of the things I'd love to explore is also the rational mind. And you mentioned this slightly a little bit before, but I want to sort of unpack
What?
this
A
further.
rational mind? We have a rational mind.
You have a rational mind. Listen here now. So the
You
rational.
clearly have not lived in America during the past few years. Like,
Well, to be honest with you, okay, Australia's definitely not that in that sort of situation, but it's not too much different. Like you're saying, it is similar in many ways. So we have our rational mind, but then trauma doesn't really link to our, or what is the link between the rational mind and the trauma that we experience? Like, is trauma rational? Is, I guess, the question I'm asking.
No, no, you know, I will, I've particularly after the last few years in America, um, I'm very skeptical about the rational mind. We often, and you're coming from India originally. You know how people can explain anything and they can justify anything. And you can go on a rampage and kill thousands of people. You say that's good for them. It's a good thing to do. So we use our rational. Our rational brain is marvelous, and we can build bridges and write books and do wonderful things. But our rational brain can also is very self-serving. We always explain things in our favor. Uh, the rational brain is not a truth teller.
Hmm.
The rational brain is primarily there to get along with other people and to get your stuff done. Uh, so, uh, but the rational brain is quite untrustworthy, actually, in many ways.
Hmm. I'm almost hearing it's a validator, so it validates bits of information that it seeks out. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it explains things.
Hmm.
And, and so you and I are using our rational brains as well as we can right now. So we try to bridge that gap between Melbourne and Boston. Um, and we're doing pretty well, I think. But we try to find the words to bridge the gap. But somebody else may be listening to us and say, "These guys are full of malarkey."
I was going to say, hopefully those tuning in feel like we're being pretty rational.
At
It's
the end, to my mind, the body tells the truth in a way. Let me measure your stress hormones. And you may smile a lot, but I want to see your physiology to see if you're indeed calm and relaxed.
yeah. So let's talk about like that aspect of the body. So because we're talking about, okay, it's not stored in the rational mind. Is there a part of the head which is directly connected to the body from your research, that is responsible for how we're
Well,
functioning?
everything is connected, but there are particular areas
Hmm.
of your
This is my question.
brain that are particularly connected. Most of all, of course, the hypothalamus and the pituitary that sort of send the stress hormones and the hormones to your body to stay in homeostasis. But another very important part of the brain is a part called the insula, and the insula basically tells you uh, what is going on in your body and what you need to do to take care of it. The messages from your body.
Hmm.
For example, uh, let's say after you and I talk, I may need to go and get some food, and my insula will give me a message of, oh, it is cold out there, and will make me feel what your body feels like when it's cold, and then I'll say, okay, I better wear my parka because it's snowing outside here, not where you are, but where am
Hmm.
I? So I need to wear something warm. And I say, at the moment I say parka to you, you go like, hell no, I'm not going to wear a parka. I'm going to sweat my butt off.
Hmm.
And so you get it, that insula gives you a sensation of what it would be like and gives you a sense of what you need to do to take care of yourself.
Hmm.
And so you should not wear a parka, and I should, and our insulas will tell us that. But when you get traumatized, these signals can get very distorted.
Disrupted. Right. Right. Right.
And so you hear in the newspaper, sometimes you read, oh, isn't it funny in that town over there? A woman thought she was growing obese, and it turns out she had a baby. And everybody says, isn't it funny? And I would go, oh, that's not funny at all. Actually, that is very, very sad. If you don't know the difference between what it's like to be fat and to have a baby, that means that there is something in your awareness of your internal self that is completely screwed up.
Hmm. Hmm.
And how you get there, that is usually trauma.
Hmm.
Because if you're not traumatized, you have a loving relationship to your body, hopefully. If you get traumatized, your body keeps sending you signals: I'm in danger, I'm scared, I'm enraged, and you try to push that down. Because you don't like the sensation for your body. So what do people do? They starve themselves, they take drugs, they become compulsive long distance runners in order to somehow manage those sensations in their bodies.
Mm, mm.
But if you feel safe and secure in the world, you don't need to manage the sensations in your body because you have a harmonious relationship with yourself.
Bessel, have you explored some of the in modern day society? It seems like body dysmorphia and like people generally have sort of an idea in their head what their bodies should look like, and potentially is that causing more of a disconnect for some people rather than connecting them to their bodies?
Yeah, that we like, when it comes to cancer psychiatrists, they give it a title, uh, and then they call it a disorder. But there's so, if you starve yourself or you uh, drink all the time, not uncommon where you live, you try to abolish certain sensations that you don't want to have.
Mm,
So the body dysmorphic piece is just one small expression of all of that.
hmm hmm
But uh, becoming morbidly obese is also very much related to people feeling safer in a body that does not attract any attention from anybody in a sexual way, for example.
mm. How underpins that initial idea of this will provide me safety, and then from there it kind of perpetuates, and you kind of
Yeah, the way you put it is more rational than it really is, more cognitive than
mm,
it really is. It's a decision that gets made on a very elementary level of your
mm,
being.
mm.
It's not like, oh, let me just become obese. Like,
Yeah, yeah, I gotcha, I gotcha.
no, it's conscious of that, yeah. Yeah.
So one of the to sort of segue, because I do want to segue into how to manage trauma and manage trauma, but like I guess healing is probably where I want to go. But
The
sort of want to
healing is,
just
yeah, healing is word, good word.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of share um, a story with you, which is, and you might have heard this. There's a there's a monk, and he wants to cross the river, and he's sitting by the river, and the river's quite turbulent, and he's reflecting on how he's going to cross this river. His journey lies across the
I've heard,
river, up the mountain, and
Dalai
down.
Lama tell that story. That's
I
very,
think so. I think so.
yeah, yes.
And from there, he sort of looks at how do I actually get across, and he doesn't have an idea, so he sits under the tree, meditates on it, thinks about it for a while, and he decides, I got it. I'm going to build a raft. Right. So he builds this gorgeous raft, like this amazing raft. He puts it together, his own ingenuity, and he builds this raft and he crosses the river and he makes it across to the other side. And having made it across to the other side of the river through this incredible thing which he never thought he would be able to cross, as he gets up and leaves the riverbank, he actually puts the raft on his back because he's so proud of
Mm,
the crossing of
mm.
the river and this ingenious thing that helped him cross this amazing river. And then he starts to go and wade on his journey up the mountain through the forest. And then he gets through a part of the forest where there's just trees everywhere. And as he's trying to navigate his way through the trees, he's damaging the raft. And the raft is he's hurting himself because he's trying to navigate through the trees with the raft. And it gets to a point where he realizes that he actually can't carry on his journey with the raft on his back because the raft is causing less mobility. It's harder to navigate. And at some point, he has the realization that, oh, okay, it's not actually about having the raft. It's about having the capability of knowing that I can build a raft whenever I need to. And then he puts down the raft and then carries on his journey um, furthermore. And I
Right.
found that to be quite a profound little parable about the things that we
It's a
hold
very
on
nice
to.
parable. Also for trauma.
Yeah.
Indeed, it's like you have a raft. Uh, and indeed, there is some deep level of a sense of um, sometimes being at home with all the stuff you build up in terms of, like, I'm better off not being close to people. I'm better off pushing people away. I'm better off not leaving my house. And all these defenses indeed get in the way of your having a life. That's very much how it is. The question is, how do you help people to lay down that raft? And I love the story actually, because when you work with traumatized people, you really listen, you really develop enormous admiration for how they have survived. Always like, uh, oh my God, I have no idea if I would have been able to survive what happened to you. I mean, one story is worse than the next story, you know? And so people have been very ingenious in being able to survive horrendous situations, but they have that raft on their shoulder. That's true. Yeah.
So let's go to healing from there, if we may. So how do we put down the raft? How do we even recognize the raft? Where do we begin?
Well, one thing I say more and more these days, as more and more people say, this is how you do it, and I found the answer. Official world of trauma studies is only 30 years old. So we're still very much on a journey of exploration, and anybody who tells you they have the answer, really don't trust them. Uh, you know, I am over 70 years old. I just started a whole new project. I'm studying psychedelic therapies these days. And every day I learn stuff that I never knew before. And 10 years ago, you would have said, psychedelic therapy. I said, don't talk nonsense to me, you know. So keep people evolving. And what is also impressive to me is how in every culture has their own indigenous ways of dealing with trauma. Because people have been traumatized as long as there have been people.
For eons, yeah.
And so when I travel, I'm always very curious about, like, I've been to Australia many times, like probably about 20 times. But I don't know what indigenous healing methods the Aboriginals have. But somebody should go find out, because I'm sure they have indigenous methods. And I learned this particularly in South Africa when I sort of hang out with Bishop Tutu a little bit, and I saw him do beautiful work, singing, moving, dancing, praying with people. That's completely different from what we do in Boston. And he was clearly, a very major healing was going on by getting people into rhythms together. Now, in our culture, we don't do rhythms therapeutically.
Yeah.
Australia, I love Australia, but I think people are even more rigid in exploring new things than people in the US. Like, I'm always surprised by how organized you guys are over there. And you're sort of a very spontaneous people, but when it comes to therapy, I'm always like, hey, push the envelope a little bit. Like, and so it's very a question of an exploration. How do people gain a sense of safety? And so part of safety for human beings is holding and touch. Therapy, we never do holding and touch.
Yeah. I might touch your hand as I hand you your prescription for drugs.
Yeah. Inappropriate. Like, what's he trying to do? I'm trying to
Wow. Yeah.
And so this whole elementary source of safety is not part of the therapy world. And touch can be extremely helpful. The second thing is movement. And again, I like to always say, kindergarten teachers know how to do that. Kids are scared, frightened, upset, and mad all the time. But what do kindergarten teachers do with kids? They sing together, and they move together, and they throw balls together. And so simple rhythmical activities make you feel in tune and in touch with the people around you. So you hang out with various spiritual communities. And for me, it would be interesting to see. So, what do these guys do to make to create that internal sense of harmony? And
Yeah.
so you feel like you're part of a larger universe. And many spiritual communities, of course, rely very heavily on chanting
Mm-hmm.
and getting your voice in sync with other voices is an enormously comforting thing for our internal world. What I've seen in my lifetime actually is that people sing less and less
Mm.
because we have these great sound systems. So we depend on it coming in rather than producing it. And I think that's a very sad movement in our world, actually. I think, and so trauma is about being out of sync with the people around you and living with an internal reality that is no longer here.
Mm.
So the the repair of trauma becomes helping people to be in sync with the people around them and to be here. I think any technique or modality that gets people there is likely to be very helpful. For example, I'm very intrigued with tango dancing. You
Mm.
know, I was invited to Argentina, and you know, as a person from Melbourne, sort of interesting. In 1900, the two richest cities in the world were Melbourne and Buenos Aires.
Ah.
And 120 years later, Melbourne is still one of the richest cities in the world, and Buenos Aires is not very doing very well at all
Mm.
because of so much trauma there, horrendous trauma. And you go to Melbourne and you go to Buenos Aires and you see how much misery there's been and brutality there's been, and then you see the tango dancing. You say, these people learn to dance the tango not because it's fun or it looks very good for tourists, it's because they have to. It is
Mm.
one beautiful way of getting your body in sync with another body and to
Mm.
feel a rhythm of belonging and togetherness that is sort of the opposite of trauma. Uh,
Mm.
Trauma is when unexpected things overwhelm you. Uh, Harmony is when you do things that are very attuned, subtly attuned to the people around you, when you feel like you're an indispensable part of a larger universe.
Whoa. Did not expect it to go there. So some of the indigenous modalities that we're talking about in terms of finding our healing are touching and movement-based therapies and singing together.
Yeah.
And these are, and this is what your research is uncovering, that these are practices that are actually supporting people back from these traumatic places.
I have to take a little thinking. That's not where my research is leading me,
Hmm.
because your research only can do what is socially acceptable and can get funded in the culture you live in.
Huh.
There's no way I can get money to study tango dancing in a serious scientific way.
Yeah.
Community said, like, it's got off the deep end.
Yeah. 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 Interesting.
We're originally prescribed what we can do. Talking is okay, drugs is okay.
Hmm.
I like to say these days, more and more, like the more immobile you are, the more respectable you are. The moment you start talking about moving, you're like, ugh.
Isn't that a trauma in itself? What
Yeah.
you're saying movement is what you're saying movement is yeah. Interesting.
So
So how much of the yeah, how much like as I'm hearing you share some of these indigenous modalities that you believe are supportive to navigating trauma then and healing. Let's call it for what it is, healing. Yeah, I can't help but reflect in this moment just potentially just the nuclear families that we live in, less tribal, less village oriented, less community oriented in some ways, as being a somewhat of a is that a collective trauma in some ways? Do you
well,
see?
no, I see that differently. I see that we're evolving into different systems, and people are incredibly adaptable.
Mm,
You can idealize village culture, and I don't know if when you were a kid you had some experience with village culture, But village culture in India is not exactly where you hope your kids will grow up,
No.
right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cruelty, a lot of patriarchy, and a lot of
Dogma.
misogyny, a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
And so, um, to my cultural mind, I think life in Melbourne is about as good as it gets. You're able to make friends.
Yeah.
You're able to take your yoga class. You're able to make your music. You're able to do all kinds of things. So I think you guys have it pretty good as the system goes. And I wouldn't say, oh, you're much better off living in a Siberian shaman as the community where people, everybody's happy. Because people weren't, So it all depends on, you can make misery everywhere and you can make happiness anywhere, depending on how respectful and in sync and open people are to each other. Yeah.
So one of the things that also stood out for me is when we were talking about some of the more indigenous ways to heal. You were talking about touch. You were talking about movement. It seemed like there was a correlation to them not needing to be, but like there being a positive impact of having someone else around, like being able to touch somebody else, like someone else holding you, or being able to dance in rhythm with somebody else, singing in unison with others. Is
Preparing
there?
together, putting your kids to bed, lying in bed together, all these elementary things.
Is there modalities where there doesn't need to be other people involved? Are there ways for self-healing that you would that you believe in?
Um, yeah, I'm surprised to hear you ask that of all people. We are communal creatures. Our brains are communal brains. The the basic premise of current psychiatry and psychology is an individualistic premise that you can heal and you can. And see that to my mind is real distortion about our human nature. That none of us do things by ourselves. None of us live by ourselves, unless you're really pretty weird. And so, to some degree, everything is communal. But can you do things to do things? Absolutely. And so, one of the things I've studied extensively is neurofeedback. Where if you have a brain that is sort of wired right now for danger and fear and being alert for stuff all the time, helping to putting electrodes on your skull and harvesting the brain waves underneath it, and then playing computer games with your own brain to reward things that make you feel calmer. Very effective. Sometimes medications can be helpful for individuals. Um, then the next thing is therapy, where you can work with somebody else, but it's still a presence of somebody else. And you can do things like EMDR, the eye movement desensitization, which works extremely well. And of course, you can take psychedelics, but again, it's like, it's a very alarming thing happening with psychedelics as it is beginning to become legal. It will come to Australia also. People more and more want to make a quick buck and give people a drug and send them off, which is completely the wrong way to do. You need to do this in a very safe setting with people around you who are there for you as you have this very deep spiritual experience. And so you could do it by yourself, but boy, I would very much be opposed to that. It's still we need people around us to guide us and to help us and to watch over us and stuff like that. And so all of the treatments, except the notable exception of neurofeedback, which I've done serious research in, can be very effective. Most of it is interpersonal.
Yeah. Awesome. And even the neurofeedback, I imagine I'd need someone like you to to interpret my results a little bit to set me up and put the electrodes on my head and stuff. So I think community is a big part.
Some of the best neurofeedback people I know live in
Melbourne,
next to the woods.
Yeah.
Moshe Pearl in Melbourne. Translation. Yeah.
Amazing. So the neurofeedback, actually, I've got a we interviewed just last week. Actually, it was Dave Asprey, and he did some work on this. And for him, forgiveness was a big part of it. He set himself up, and he just realized that there was some certain triggers, and the biggest one for him was forgiveness. And as soon as he just started forgiving people, like wow, his system literally started changing, and the pattern started to move. So yeah, I find that really fascinating. I We've touched on the topic, so I feel like I want to just ask you the questions around this. So in
Yeah, we
terms
have
of
only
like,
5 minutes. We have 4 minutes left only.
so tell me, psychedelic therapies, what's going on in there? Is it that you get a different perspective when you're in these states? And again, like you said, set and setting, like being around, safe place is important. But how, like, what are you finding and how is it helping?
No, but clearly, but all of these agents do in different ways, and we don't really haven't pinpointed yet what is best for what. All these agents really uproot you from your primal orientation in life. That you make for a moment, there's new brain connections, so you see the world in a completely different way. And so, particularly when you're uh, very frightened, very scared, very much trauma driven, you live in a very narrow reality where the outcome is always, I'm going to get hurt. Huh? And, and to be transported into a different reality where you oftentimes experience a certain unity with the world around you. It's very common elements of seeing yourself in a much larger perspective, um, and very much this notion of an individual perspective oftentimes it disappears. You really feel like, oh, I'm just a part of a large universe that's flowing, and I'm here today, not tomorrow, but the universe goes on. And so, for a moment to get the experience and to have you to notice your own experiences here, yeah, that happened. It's part of this whole big complex thing that happens. And then after the drug wears off, you go back to sort of where you were before, but you have gotten the perspective. Perspective is almost too cognitive a word. You have had an experience of that the universe is much bigger than you are, and that you also usually end up with a deep sense of gratitude of, boy, the world is a magical place, but I am a very small part of the universe. It's really the issue of ego and self-importance sort of disappears on those drugs.
And that perspective shifts, helps us shift our relationship.
Yeah, and when you get traumas, of course, you may hate yourself, but it's very egocentric. You're not open to the world because you're always taking care of this creature that is so hurt and upset and frightened and in danger. And so it's a very egocentric position to be in trauma.
I imagine releasing some of those traumas would be quite challenging when you're having those perspective shifts. Like, and again, encouraging that set and setting that is a safe one. Yeah.
Well, that's it for now. When I come to Melbourne,
it would be an absolute pleasure to drop in connect. Dr. Bessel, man, like really, thank you so much. Like you've dedicated so much of your life to investigating trauma, so that other people can live trauma, like traumaless lives. It's such a blessing. So I want to thank you for your time and your energy and your blessings here today. But also, it's a lifetime's work that you've put into this. So thank you so much for just who you are and what you're doing. And I look forward to staying in touch in the future.
Take care. Be good.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment. And if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.